Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, November 5th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast on a late election night edition. I'm Moshe Nunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. As we record this, just past midnight Eastern time, we're trying to get you the latest and greatest from across the country, given all the election results. Some fascinating, but not altogether surprising results. Jill, Democratic wins in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Virginia, among others. Also a major victory for Democratic Socialist candidate Zoran Mamdani in New York City. We'll get to all of that. I know you've been covering a number of elections in Long Island as well.
That's right. In Nassau County, where I am currently at the GOP headquarters, bucking the trend that we're seeing nationwide. It was a big night for Republicans here.
Yes, a lot of interesting results depending on where you're at. All elections are local, Jill.
That's right. So let's get to the headlines here. Election night takeaways as Democrats ran the table in a number of states. But does it translate as they look at the midterms next year? And how does President Trump react?
And we'll discuss those very much talked about results in New York City and what they mean.
Plus, it is day 36 of the government shutdown and a dire warning from Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy saying that the department could be forced to shut down some airspace next week, plus a status update on where things stand in terms of reaching a deal.
Everyone, as we get these more dire warnings about what this may mean for air travel next week, a sense that might force Democrats and Republicans to cut a deal this week.
A deadly cargo plane crash at Louisville Airport Tuesday, killing 7 and injuring another 11. We'll have the latest on that. And former Vice President Dick Cheney dying at the age of 84. We look back at his life and legacy. Overseas, bend a knee like Beckham. Soccer star David Beckham knighted by King Charles.
He is now Sir David Beckham to all of you.
And People magazine has picked Bridgerton's Jonathan Bailey as the sexiest man alive for 2025. And speaking of sex, a new study says the key to a pay raise could be morning sex. We'll explain.
A little not safe for work item for you at the end of the podcast.
And Moshe has on this day in history.
Some major board game history for all of you on this day.
All right, let's start with the results of yesterday's election. A huge night for Democrats nationally, winning governorships in Virginia and New Jersey and key statewide seats in Pennsylvania and Georgia, and a very important redistricting plan that Democrats were pushing for in California. We'll get to all of that in a bit. But let's start in New York City, where Zoran Mamdani was elected mayor of the city on Tuesday, and it caps a stunning ascent for the 34-year-old state lawmaker who is set to become the city's most liberal mayor in generations. Mamdani got more than 1 million votes. He had just over 50% of the votes as of 11 p.m. Eastern. That's in contrast to Andrew Cuomo's 41% and GOP nominee Curtis Sliwa with about 7% of the vote. With the victory, the Democratic Socialist will etch his place in history as the city's first Muslim mayor, the first of South Asian heritage, and the first born in Africa. The 34-year-old will also become the city's first socialist mayor and the youngest mayor in more than a century when he takes office on January 1st. He built a campaign around tackling the city's affordability crisis, including promises to freeze rents, develop city-run grocery stores, and offer free childcare. His campaign also uniquely took advantage of social media and mobilized tens of thousands of predominantly young volunteers and motivated hundreds of thousands of first-time voters, many of them Gen Z and millennials. In these last few days, Cuomo closed the gap a bit, but it was not enough. It appears Cuomo convinced a number of Republicans to vote for him, but he did not make enough inroads on the left among Democrats. And that's in a city where Democrats outnumber Republicans 6-1. Back to Mamdani, quite a feat, given that at the beginning of this year, he was polling at 1% and completely unknown. Here is a bit of his victory speech.
The working people of New York have been told by the wealthy and the well-connected that power does not belong in their hands. Fingers bruised from lifting boxes on the warehouse floor, palms calloused from delivery bike handlebars, knuckles scarred with kitchen burns. These are not hands that have been allowed to hold power. And yet, over the last 12 months, you have dared to reach for something greater. Tonight, against all odds, we have grasped it. The future is in our hands. My friends, we have toppled a political dynasty.
So the speech was notable, Jill. It was not much of outreach to all New Yorkers. It was very much focused on his supporters, the working class. He made a point last night to quote Eugene Debs at the beginning of the speech. For those of you familiar with American history, that was the man who ran for president as a socialist 5 times. So very much you heard last night activist Mamdani come out. And this was probably his biggest speech so far. So if that's an indication of how he will lead, certainly very interesting, because I think there are a number of New Yorkers, nearly half, who voted against him, that are looking for signs as to what type of mayor he will be. As you noted, he's a 34-year-old state assemblyman. And he came out of nowhere, Jill. He talked about beating a major legacy here. He beat Andrew Cuomo, a former 2-term governor. Cuomo, the son of Mario Cuomo, who was a 3-term governor. So the Cuomo family dynasty here defeated. And by the way, he beat Andrew Cuomo twice in a matter of months. He beat him in the Democratic primary in June and then beat him again as an independent. As for Cuomo here, despite the family dynasty, despite his time as governor, he ran a campaign that was extremely lackluster. And this is how Democrats describe it: lacked soul, lacked effort. It felt at times like he was running a sort of an entitled campaign, like I'm Cuomo, like you should elect me mayor here. And after that defeat in June, it wasn't clear that he learned many lessons. Even on this podcast, he came out and said, I got to do more social media. But at its core here, Mamdani ran a campaign about something he will build. And Cuomo's campaign was very much about, I'm not Mamdani. He doesn't have experience. And it's a tried and true tactic that when you run a campaign about positivity, about things you might accomplish, you tend to do better than running a campaign that is at its core against somebody. That's what you saw specifically at the end here from Cuomo, very much trying to scare the hell out of New Yorkers about what a Mamdani mayor term would look like. His big thing was trying to clear the field, trying to get Curtis Sliwa out. He got Eric Adams out. But even as of this juncture, Jill, when you look at the results, even if you add up the Sliwa votes, all of them, which, by the way, there's no way that all Sliwa votes would have gone to Cuomo, he still wouldn't have defeated Mamdani here. Jill, you noted some of what Mamdani ran on here. The big question, again, is how he'll govern. He talked about the free buses, the free childcare, the government-run grocery stores, freezing rent for 2 million New Yorkers, building a $1 billion Department of Community Safety that'll handle mental health emergencies, as opposed to the NYPD handling all of that. He will have to pay for all of that. That'll be one of the big questions here.
So he has called for raising taxes to pay for all of that. The governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, who endorsed him, she has said, no, that is not happening, but we'll see how much leverage he has over her political fate next year when she is up for re-election.
Yeah, he registered a lot of young voters. He's got a lot of people sort of eating out of his palms right now. And so how does she play this game where she endorsed him, but also, New York State is not New York City, and she'll be running a very close election against a Republican next year. We will see how he governs initially, Jill. A reminder, New York City, if it was a state, would be the 11th biggest state, just the city itself, about 9 million people, a $120 billion budget, hundreds of thousands of employees, an economy the size of Japan, New York City. And so who will he appoint to key positions will be a big question here. He has talked about keeping the NYPD commissioner, Jessica Tisch, on board. Whether he does that and then whether she stays at the job will be a big question, given his rhetoric in the past about the police. He's talked about defunding the police. He's called them racist. He's tried to apologize at times for that, but not like a concerted public apology to all of them. He's been doing it at an individual level. So that'll be one of the questions we watch here. Public safety will be a key issue here. What life is like in New York. Will homeless encampments come back? Will he release people from prison, as he's talked about? He comes from the Democratic Socialists of America. They have an agenda item to eliminate all misdemeanors. He says he doesn't support that. But to what extent does he get involved in that? And does Jessica Tisch want to stay on board for that will be a big question. One of the things we should also keep in mind, Jessica Tisch happens to be Jewish. And a big issue is anti-Semitism. More than 2/3 of hate crimes in New York are targeting Jews. And based on the exit polls last night, more than 2/3 of New York Jews voted against him, voted for either Sliwa or Cuomo yesterday, worried about his anti-Israel rhetoric, worried about the fact that he doesn't vehemently condemn Hamas, worried about their safety in New York City, given the aforementioned anti-Semitic attacks. And Jews here, more than 1 million of them, live in New York City. So you didn't hear much in the way of outreach. I mean, he did say, anti-Semitism is bad in last night's speech. But how do things unfold here in the coming months and years will be a key question. And then one more thing here, Jill, will be how does he confront Trump? We've seen what Trump has done when it comes to deploying the National Guard in his fights in LA, Chicago, other places. He has threatened in recent days to cut all funding from New York, or most funding from New York City. New York depends on billions of dollars in federal funding to pay for key programming. Here is a bit, Jill, of his approach last night to Donald Trump.
So, Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up. New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built by immigrants, powered by immigrants. And as of tonight, led by an immigrant. So hear me, President Trump, when I say this. To get to any of us, you will have to get through all of us.
So, Moshe, it looks like we're going to be in for an interesting few years here in New York.
Jill?
To say the least.
Yes. New York is going to be interesting. Does Trump send in the National Guard today? I mean, these two, it will be a remarkable thing to watch. There's all of what we know going into this, and there's the unexpected things, right? I mean, look at the things we've confronted in recent years between COVID and other matters. As Eric Adams, the outgoing mayor, so ineloquently said in an interview a couple of years ago, he was asked, what makes New York great or makes New York unique? He goes, on any given day, you might get a plane into the Twin Towers, or you might see a new business open. Anyway, the point of all that, it's a bizarre clip. You can find it on social media. But the point is, you never know what you're going to be experiencing here in New York City. And certainly a huge challenge ahead for Mamdani. But that wasn't the only election we watched last night.
Right. So now to 2 of the governor's races that we're watching in Virginia. Abigail Spanberger, a centrist Democrat, defeated Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears. She is the first woman ever to lead the Commonwealth, and she'll succeed outgoing Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin.
Throughout my entire career, I have worked with anyone and everyone, regardless of political party, to deliver results for the people that I serve. And that's because I believe in this idea that there is so much more that unites us as Virginians and as Americans than divides us. And I know in my heart that we can unite for Virginia's future, and we can set an example for the rest of the nation.
Jill, it was a big night for Democrats in Virginia last night, flipping a lot of red seats to blue. I mean, Virginia was a red state, then became a purple state, has increasingly become a blue state. One of the key factors last night in Virginia in particular, a lot of federal government workers live in Virginia. Many of them have been impacted by DOGE cuts. Many of them, if not all of them, have been impacted by the government shutdown. It even meant that last night, one of the elections we were watching, Jay Jones, the Democrat who was running for attorney general, you might remember we told you about his texting scandal that was revealed a few weeks ago. He, in 2022, texted a Republican his dreams of killing a Republican in the state house. Just horrific things he wrote in text message form. He apologized for those remarks. There was a sense that he should drop out of the campaign, that it would hurt other Democrats. And no such thing. In fact, not only did all these Democrats win, he won his own race despite that scandal.
Also in New Jersey, Democratic Representative Mikey Sherrill won the gubernatorial race Tuesday, defeating Republican Jack Ciattarelli. Sherrill is a 4-term congresswoman, a former U.S. Navy helicopter pilot. She campaigned on codifying abortion rights, lowering health care and housing costs, and countering what she calls the chaos and extremism of the Trump administration. She'll succeed outgoing Democratic Governor Phil Murphy. He was term limited. So, Moshe, now I've got 2 centrist Democrats in New Jersey and Virginia, but again in New York, a Democratic socialist. So the 2 opposing sides of the Democratic Party. What are your big takeaways from this election day?
As Democrats like to say, we're a Big Tent party, the Democrats say. Jill, the takeaway is know your constituents and speak to their concerns, right? Because Spanberger, Sherrill, Mamdani, run the gamut, run the pendulum of where the Democratic Party is today. In fact, the aforementioned governors say that, Mamdani, has nothing to do with me, and I oppose a number of his views. But the point of it is have a positive agenda. Speak to your constituents, message to Cuomo, actually work a campaign out there, speak to people, speak to their concerns, their primary concerns. In Virginia and New Jersey, states that increasingly, are competitive, though Trump lost them all three of his presidential runs, Republicans have a chance there. In Virginia, Republicans ran most of the state offices, managed most of the state offices, and then a number of them all lost their seats last night. Now, this is not altogether surprising. Typically, the party out of power when people are unhappy. And the exit polls last night showed that the majority of Americans, Jill, are worried about the economy. You tend to put the opposition in power. So that's interesting. In Pennsylvania, all three Democrats on the Supreme Court won their statewide seats. In Georgia, two Democrats won statewide seats in roles where there hasn't been a Democrat in for 25 years. So you did see a pretty good night for Democrats. And again, it speaks to candidate quality. And that's going to be a key thing as they look to take back the Senate and the House from Republicans next year. Are they running good candidates who speak to the issues of their states and districts, regardless of whether you fall on the Mamdani end of the spectrum or you fall on more of the Mikey Sherrill Spanberger end of the spectrum?
We also want to mention in California, voters approved Proposition 50 on Tuesday, with almost 2/3 of the voters selecting yes to a plan that will suspend the state's independent redistricting commission maps for 3 election cycles. The new legislature-drawn map, backed by Governor Gavin Newsom, is expected to add up to 5 Democratic House seats. California has 52 total seats, and reduce the number of competitive districts ahead of the 2026 midterms, which are a year away. So Democrats would need to gain 3 seats and not lose any to take control of the House next year.
Yeah, and there's a war. I mean, it's like a game of Risk or whatever board game you want to compare it to happening across the country. Because how did this all get started in California? Well, Donald Trump has told Republicans across the country, I want more seats, redistrict, redraw your maps, even though that is not the tradition to do mid-decade. We do it at the beginning of each decade in America. There have been a couple examples in history where this has been done mid-decade, but he said, Texas, redraw your map. North Carolina, redraw your map. Missouri, redraw your map. Right now, it's Republican +7 on new seats. In particular, the Texas move added what looks like 5 new Republican seats there, or drew out 5 Democrats and replaced them with Republicans the way they're drawing them. So Gavin Newsom replied, being like, we got to do what we can do here, even though California, 43 of the 52 seats are already controlled by Democrats. Well, based on this passing last night, overwhelmingly, wasn't even close. It looks like California is going to have 48 of 52 Democratic seats. So we see this board game happening across the country. We're looking at Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, a number of other states could go here. And again, it comes as there's a razor thin margin in the U.S. House. Every one of these seats matters here. So this probably, Jill, we saved it to the end here, but it's probably the most impactful thing that happened on Tuesday night is this California redrawing its districts. 5 new House seats for Democrats. That is a huge move here. And again, will have a huge impact for next year's midterms because, as you asked, what are the lessons here? Well, Gavin Newsom got a big win here. He's certainly energized by this. This means, this is another sort of feather in his cap as he looks to run for president in a couple of years. Though someone else looking at last night's results, Jill, as we sort of end this with 2028, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, looks at Mamdani's victory and says, I could take out Chuck Schumer in this state if I ran for senator in a couple of years, or maybe I should aim higher. Maybe it's time to run for president. Maybe there are lessons from New York City for the country, even though we've mentioned repeatedly on this podcast, New York City is not the country in many ways. But she has the energy, she has the rhetoric, she has a social media connection. She's got a lot of things that Mamdani has, and we could talk about this another time, and similarities to Trump in their ability to blow up the party, social media, connecting with voters, yada, 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 making big promises they might not be able to pay for. And so she's one to watch out of last night's results as well.
Okay, now to the government shutdown, which reached 36 days today, the longest in U.S. history. On Tuesday, a dire warning from the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy. He said the Department of Transportation might be forced to shut down the airspace in certain parts of the country if the government shutdown continues into next week. He said controllers told him that they could manage missing 1 paycheck, but not 2. which would happen early next week if Congress does not end the stalemate.
So if you bring us to a week from today, Democrats, you will see mass chaos, you will see mass flight delays, you'll see mass cancellations, and you may see us close certain parts of the airspace because we just cannot manage it.
Duffy says some of the workers have been forced to take on second jobs so that they could pay the bills. He initially had said that the workers who call out sick could be fired, but he has since softened his position and said no one will be fired for missing work during the shutdown.
So this is getting increasingly significant here. The FAA now saying that nearly 50%, half of all major air traffic control facilities now face staffing shortages. And remember, we had shortages going into this shutdown due to understaffing the past few years. So the shutdown impacting the folks up in the air traffic control towers, the major regional centers, but also the TSA workers that manage the security lines, as we told you yesterday. Several hour delays at several airports, including at Houston Intercontinental. Now, Duffy and government officials say the system remains safe. It's one of the reasons they're talking about shutting down airspace, and they cut down on the number of flights. And part of these delays are due to the fact that there's fewer people in the air traffic control towers that can manage many flights. So they're slowing down on the number of flights going in and going out. Nonetheless, there is more risk in the system here. You have single individuals doing the jobs of 2 people or 3 people, even with delays and fewer planes coming in and out. So ultimately, safety will be paramount here, but major concern that next week we could see something we've never seen before in terms of airspace shutdowns. And one of the things officials hope will bring Democrats and Republicans together in the coming days.
And as for where things stand with the shutdown, again, the longest in history at 36 days. On Tuesday, the Republican-backed stopgap bill passed by Congress failed in the Senate for the 14th time. And as of now, there are no Democratic proposals set to be voted on. Democrats have refused to vote for any clean stopgap resolution that does not address health care subsidies, which are set to expire at the end of the year. Republicans, though, reject the prospect of negotiating while the government remains shut down. And at this point, that stopgap bill only funds the government for another 3 weeks or so, less than that.
Right. So they're looking at a new stopgap bill here. On Tuesday, we heard from some Republicans who said that they have actually grown optimistic there might be a deal here. Several Republicans and Democrats sort of looking after the election. So as we wake up this morning, post-elections, there's a hope that some of what you've seen unfold here in recent weeks was partially because an election was coming up and the two sides were trying to stand firm for their base voters. And a deal might be reached here. You also have Trump at the White House, who doesn't seem keen on any sort of concessions right now. In fact, Jill, in the past 2 days, he's been pushing hard on his own side, on Senate Republicans, to kill the filibuster. The filibuster is the tradition in the Senate that requires most bills to have 60 votes for passage, not just the simple 51 majority. And right now, Republicans are in charge. But some Republicans say, listen, if we kill the filibuster and go to majority rule in the Senate, that means that Democrats will do the same when they get a majority again. And we're concerned about setting that precedent here. So you're going to see a lot of this nuclear talk, this idea of killing the filibuster. But so far, you've seen Republican leaders stand firm in the Senate, telling Trump, like, we're not doing that. We're not going so far. We don't like that precedent. Trump, allegedly, according to one Axios report, is going to make life, quote, a living hell for Republicans until they kill the filibuster. So that's a bit of what you may see unfold here because, from his vantage point, you kill the filibuster. Republicans have 53 votes. They can end this shutdown immediately without having to compromise to Democrats. But remember, the issue Democrats are fighting on here is Obamacare, is health subsidies, and there are just as many Republicans, if not slightly more Republicans impacted by Obamacare than Democratic voters out there. So increasingly, you are seeing Republicans behind the scenes say, yeah, we're going to have to come to a deal there as well. So we're going to watch all this unfold because I don't think either side wants to subject Americans to that warning we talked about when it comes to air travel.
Okay, now to the speed read from the Associated Press. A UPS cargo plane crashed and exploded in a massive fireball Tuesday while taking off from the company's hub in Louisville, Kentucky, killing at least 7 people and injuring 11. The plane crashed at about 5:15 p.m. as it was departing for Honolulu. It was carrying about 38,000 gallons of fuel for that long trip from Kentucky to Hawaii. The fire spread easily to nearby facilities, including a large recycling center. Video showed flames on the plane's left wing and a trail of smoke. The plane then lifted slightly off the ground before crashing and exploding in a huge fireball. Video also showed portions of a building's shredded roof next to the end of a runway. Among the 11 who were hurt, some had very significant injuries, according to Kentucky's governor, Andy Beshear.
So this plane was an MD-11. It was more than 30 years old. Federal investigators are coming to research what exactly happened. Some of you asked, as we've been talking about some of the airline issues, is this related to the air traffic control? It does not appear so at this juncture. Something catastrophic happened to this plane just after it took off, Jill, leading to this massive fireball. We heard from a number of you in Kentucky who sent us photos from miles away that you can see the smoke and see the fire from there. Now, UPS's largest package handling facility is in Louisville. They had to halt package sorting last night. They say it'll reopen at some point today, but we should add UPS operates about 300 daily flights out of Louisville, 400,000 packages an hour. Now, one positive here, there was no hazardous material on board the plane, but still getting to the bottom of this, Jill, will be super important just given how UPS operates. MD-11s are still heavily used in the cargo plane world. And unfortunately, Jill, there are a couple of people missing as of this hour. So the death toll, they fear, might be going up.
From the Mo News Substack, former Vice President Dick Cheney died on Monday at the age of 84. A spokesperson said the cause of death was complications of pneumonia along with cardiac and vascular disease. Cheney served as vice president to George W. Bush between 2001 and 2009, and he was one of the most powerful and influential vice presidents in American history. After the attacks on September 11th, 2001, he was one of the chief architects of the War on Terror and helped lead the country into the Iraq War. Prior to the White House, he spent 10 years as a congressman from Wyoming. He was also the youngest White House chief of staff in history, and he was defense secretary from 1989 to 1993 under George H.W. Bush.
Yeah, incredible climb there for Cheney, who showed up as an intern in his 20s in Washington, and then was quickly able to rise up there for Gerald Ford. Jill, he would have been Speaker of the House if not for that call from George H.W. Bush, Bush the father, to become Secretary of Defense. His first pick was being rejected by his own party, and so he called Cheney and said, hey, come be my Secretary of Defense. And that's where Cheney learned one of his lessons in regards to Saddam Hussein and Iraq. The hope was that if the U.S. in that first Persian Gulf War pushed Saddam back from Kuwait, that ultimately the Iraqi people would take him down. That did not turn out to be true. So 10 years later, Cheney, as vice president now for Bush's son, George W. Bush, still remembered what took place there 10 years ago. And then enter 9/11, which we should note, Jill, Bush was traveling that day. So Cheney was running things out of the Situation Room, of course, in concert with George W. Bush as he was popping around the country. He was at an event in Florida that morning and then eventually makes his way back to the White House that evening. But the lesson Cheney learns, from his first time as Secretary of Defense and then from 9/11 is that they can never allow anything like this to happen again. So they begin the war on terrorism in Afghanistan, take Kabul, bring down the Taliban, blow up the al-Qaeda camps, though, of course, bin Laden then goes on the run for a decade or so. And then there's the pivot to Iraq. And Cheney had a philosophy that he characterized as his 1% doctrine. If there's a 1% chance of terrorists getting their hands on weapons of mass destruction, we need to treat that as certainty. Now, of course, that absolutism does have ramifications. And so the idea was, if there's a chance here, and he believed in some of the evidence that Saddam Hussein might be hiding weapons of mass destruction and that might get to terrorists, that the U.S. needs to go invade Iraq and engage in regime change. Now, of course, that leads to a situation, Jill, where still today, in the aftermath of Cheney's death, we still have U.S. troops in Iraq, a war that has cost a couple $1 trillion, led to the death of thousands of Americans between soldiers and contractors, civilians as well, and the Middle East that we have today. It also triggered a sharp backlash here at home against foreign intervention. The feeling of the failure in Iraq in Afghanistan. Of course, we saw the Taliban come back into power pretty quickly there in the aftermath of our withdrawal from there a couple of years ago. But it really helped fuel this sort of populist, nationalist momentum, this idea, what about us? What about America? America first, the coalescing around Donald Trump. So you see in the origins of Cheney's philosophy and the execution of the foreign policy where America is today. Obviously, there's some global machinations in there. There was the global financial collapse at the end of Bush there as well. But nonetheless, the Bush-Cheney era of foreign intervention, we're going to create democracies around the world, very quickly went south. And so you saw Americans say, okay, we're done with that. We're done with this role in the world. And that's what you see playing out here now during the Trump administration. You know, Cheney was always very much a policy wonk. So there was never this sense that he would run for president. He also was at times at odds with his own party. He did have a daughter who was a lesbian. So very much those social conservative values, you know, he was actually okay with gay marriage at a time where the party was not. There was a moment in a debate in 2004 where, you know, he defended that, where Democrats tried to use that as an attack line there, trying to divide Republicans. And he stood by all of that. And then, of course, you know, in the last couple of years, coming out vehemently against Trump, going so far as to endorse Kamala Harris in the election last year.
From the Mo News Instagram, King Charles III knighted soccer legend David Beckham on Tuesday. The retired England captain and entrepreneur was recognized at a ceremony at Windsor Castle for his, quote, services to sport and to charity. Here is Beckham talking to reporters.
You know, I think that's what's special about today. It's not just because of my sport, it's because of the philanthropic work that I've done. The 14-year-old boy from East London standing here in the castle with His Majesty the King. It's a very proud moment for me and my family.
Beckham has partnered with UNICEF, the UN's Children Fund, for 2 decades, and he has also campaigned to eradicate malaria.
And don't forget, Jill, he's also the subject of a lot of memes from the series he did with his wife that you often see online. But officially now, he is Sir David Beckham to all of you. One of the things you get when you become a knight is you get to be referred to as Sir. He is 50 years old. He's been retired from professional soccer for more than a decade, but still very involved. Right now, he co-owns the Major League Soccer team down in Florida, Inter Miami. So you might see him down there. In addition to captaining the English soccer team, or football team, as you say, in the rest of the world, he also played for Man United, Real Madrid, the LA Galaxy, Paris Saint-Germain. And one note, if you see the pictures of the video we posted on Instagram, the suit that he wore to be knighted, designed by his wife, Victoria, former Spice Girl, Posh Spice herself.
From People, Jonathan Bailey, a British actor known for his roles in Bridgerton and the Wicked films, was named People's Sexiest Man Alive on Tuesday. It marks the first time that an openly gay man has been bestowed the honor. Bailey is 37 years old. He's a longtime stage actor who rose to mainstream fame during the pandemic for his role as Lord Anthony in the Netflix series Bridgerton. And he has since earned an Emmy nomination for his performance in the 2023 Showtime miniseries Fellow Travelers, where he played a closeted congressional staffer during the McCarthy era.
You can look out for him later this month in part 2 of Wicked. Of course, last year he was in part 1 of the Wicked movie musical as Prince Fiero. He also starred alongside Scarlett Johansson in Jurassic World Rebirth this summer. The People magazine Sexiest Man Alive is now 40 years running, going back to Mel Gibson as the Sexiest Man Alive back in 1985. Others who were given that honor, George Clooney, Tom Cruise, Michael B. Jordan, Paul Rudd, and most recently, Jill, last year, John Krasinski.
And Moshe, speaking of the Sexiest Man Alive, a final not safe for work speed read for all of you. So if you have kids, you might want to turn this down. From the New York Post, the key to success, morning sex. Apparently, a little action before work enhances employee productivity and better positions workers to get pay increases. That's according to a new study from Zip Health, an online pharmacy. The study author says full-time American workers who have sex before work in the morning have the highest levels of productivity at 71%, task completion at 70%, focus at 58%, motivation, and also job satisfaction. And the data shows it also boosts income. Over half of American workers who have morning sex say they received a raise in the past year, which is more than any other group. The researchers surveyed 1,000 U.S. job holders spanning the generational spectrum from the 20-somethings of Gen Z to baby boomers in their 60s and beyond.
So who knew that getting a little action in the morning led to all of these, even Jill, raises in the past year? But I guess if you're more productive and more happy at work, that potentially leads to a raise there. They actually broke down who's having the most and who's having the least in the morning. It turns out Gen Xers over the age of 45, 1 out of 5 of you getting some love, extra love in the morning, followed by millennials at 17% of millennials, and then Gen Z at 16%, I guess then boomers after that. And they also broke things down by profession, types of profession and industries. If you work in marketing, you finish number 1 in this survey, at least when it comes to getting busy in the morning. Also doing pretty well in the morning if you work in hospitality, manufacturing, and construction, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th place there. And according to the study, about a third, just over a third of the workforce, from executives to business owners to entry-level workers, credit morning sex over caffeine with raising their spirits each day. So we were talking about coffee yesterday, Jill, and this morning it appears there's some science here before you get on your feet and pour your first cup.
In some ways, it does make sense because overall, it sets
I think it makes sense in every way, Jill.
Yeah. I guess it's obvious and we don't need to say more.
In other news, the sun rose in the east and set in the west yesterday. Which brings us to On This Day in History. On this day in 1872, suffragist Susan B. Anthony defied the law by casting a vote in the presidential election on this day in 1872. She was then arrested and charged with, quote, knowingly voting without having the lawful right to vote. Of course, women did not have the right to vote in 1872. They wouldn't have the right for another 40 plus years. She was found guilty of committing a crime at trial. She was fined $100. She refused to pay it. We should note. She was then taken to jail. She then had a federal court case where she unsuccessfully argued that the 14th Amendment gave her the right to vote in the U.S. Of course, that would reinforce a decades-long movement to finally get women the right to vote. And that wouldn't happen nationally until 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. Some board game history for you on this day. Parker Brothers releasing Monopoly on this day in 1935, a board game that has since sold hundreds of millions of copies. There's lots of versions of it, customized versions, often regional editions, wherever you live. It's been licensed in dozens of languages in 113 countries. There was a controversy earlier this year, Jill, as we reported. They were going to a fully digital app edition, and it led to a lot of people upset that this is one of the things that they can actually break their kids away from social media and devices for. So the OG edition of Monopoly continues to be sold wherever you are. On this day in 1940, Franklin Roosevelt becomes the first president to be elected for an unprecedented third term in office. Of course, he would go on to get a fourth term in office. That would then lead to the 22nd Amendment, which limited presidents to 2 terms, which then fast forward led Donald Trump recently to question that entire thing. But it appears, at least based on the 60 Minutes interview over the weekend, that he's going to let that go, we think. And a bit of music history on this day. The Beach Boys on this day in 1988 have their first #1 hit in 22 years. You have to go back to Good Vibrations in 1966 for a #1 hit. And then 1988 brings us Kokomo, which was used in the movie Cocktail. Now, we should mention Kokomo, not a real place, but everything else in the song, Jill, Aruba, Jamaica, all the other places, real. But the main place they talk about in the song and they sing about in the chorus, Kokomo, not a real place. And depending on what story you believe, it's inspired by various beaches and various places. There's some places that claim they're the inspo of Kokomo. Not clear that they are.
It still sounds like a lovely place to visit, though. I will say that.
It sounds amazing. And if you find it, Jill, please let the people know.
All right, everybody. That is a wrap. Thank you for listening to this Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. The reviews really help.
I'll be doing lives on Substack throughout the day and over on Instagram with election analysis. So if you can't get enough of that, stay tuned to our Substack, where you can subscribe, mo.news/newsletter, as well as the Mo News Instagram page.
You couldn't wait, Moshe, the 10 seconds to eat?
No.
Okay, bye, everybody.
This is Leah. Thank you for listening for Mo Pocket with Mom and Dia.